Mr. President, first of all, let me say on behalf of all my colleagues how grateful we are for the hospitality here on this snowy afternoon in Russia. Secondly, we feel very privileged that you've agreed to the kind of access and interview that we're planning on proceeding with here today. As you know already, this is Time Magazine's biggest enterprise journalism event of every year, so we take it very seriously and put a lot of effort into it. And I will begin the interview with the first question, which is something that I'm curious about both as a man and as a journalist, which you were born in 1946. I was born in 1948. We're of the same generation. We were both raised throughout the Cold War. We were both raised with each of our respective countries being held up as the specter of the enemy, the evil empire, whatever we were to one another. Yet, historically, Russia and the United States seem to find themselves aligned together in most of the big conflicts, World War I, World War II. My question is, with that history in mind, looking forward, how do you envision Russia and the United States going forward, their relationship with the two of them in relation to everything? And how do a generation such as ours recover from the way that we grew up thinking and proceed, and how does that turn into a partnership, or does it, or what happens from here?
I could not have been born in 1946 because my father was wounded in the war. My mom survived the Leningrad blockade. They had lost 2 children and could not think of starting to have children right away. That's why I was born a little later, in 1952. But that should not change the essence of the issue. The question that you asked is very relevant at this point and for the future. My answer will be somewhat philosophical, just as your question was. Considering the fact that Russia and the USA were allies in the 2 major military conflicts in history, World War I and World War II, so there is some objective reality that unites us in difficult times. I think it's the geopolitical setting, the geopolitical interests, but there's also some sort of moral aspect in our cooperation in the most difficult times of the history of our countries. Of course, the Cold War period was a tragic stage in our relationship. I would not want to see the rudiments of these former relations today and in the future. I hope I will not hurt your feelings. You asked me to be honest, and I will be honest with you. I think that in the last decade, or maybe even in the recent 50 years, American social mentality has been infected with the idea of exclusive uniqueness of Americans. Maybe there are certain reasons for that, because this is unprecedented in human history. In 250 years, a remote colony turned into a thriving, highly developed country, one of the leaders today. This says a lot about the giftedness of the American nation, optimal design of the political and economic areas. But leaders do not usually get special rights. They have special obligations. And if a leader begins to think that he has special rights, he usually loses his leadership position. When we had 2 major world camps, the Western Bloc with the USA as the leader and the Eastern Bloc headed by the Soviet Union, there was a possibility of strict discipline of communication between countries in the framework of bloc mentality. But now, when most of the members of this international fellowship do not feel threatened, this habit of, again, sorry, I don't mean to offend you, of dictating something in international matters is not supported and often is even resisted. Different methods are needed today, different tools of communication, different ways to fight against current threats. Today, in order to be successful, one needs to be able to negotiate and find compromises. Ability to search for compromises is not some external diplomatic politeness, but respect for the partner's legal interests. whenever and wherever we are able to negotiate, whatever and whenever we can find solutions, taking the partners' interests into account, we do it. For example, North Korea. We decided to be patient and take the matter seriously, began to consider each other's interests, as well as the interests of the subject of our international discussion, North Korea itself. And taking this approach, we solved the problem, maybe not completely, but to a great extent. And in cases when we were not able to be guided by these basic principles, and some economic or political selfishness interests rule, we cannot find real solutions for current problems. You mentioned one of them, but it's not just terrorism. By the way, I would not define terrorism as Islamic terrorism. We think, and this is my personal conviction too, terrorism does not have a national or religious face. Terrorism is international, and people with radical views could be found anywhere, in all countries, and all religious confessions. From time to time, something calms down, and other things come to the surface. We don't fight against religious views. We fight against intolerance, no matter what it is clothed in. So when we consider each other's interests, we are able to achieve lasting results. But when, sadly, we cannot overcome our political and economic selfishness, we don't see results. But it seems that understanding of how important it is to consider each other's interests, as well as other members of international communication, this understanding is now prevailing. I can use the Middle East Conference in Annapolis as an example. I am deeply convinced that President Bush took a huge responsibility, a big burden, personally, and I want to congratulate him on this. I think he did not take this risk in vain. It's a serious step towards finding a solution to one of the oldest and hardest problems, the settlement process in the Middle East. We have already done everything we could to support him and will continue to work in this manner.
As John mentioned, you were very supportive of the United States after 9/11. I believe that your phone call was one of the first that President Bush received. How would you say that the U.S. has handled the so-called war on terror? You mentioned in your previous answer that terrorism is a worldwide phenomenon, but there are those in the U.S. who think that the response to 9/11 should have been more of a police action rather than, for example, invading another country. How do you think the U.S. has done in its response to terrorism? Do you think it was a mistake to invade Iraq?
Our position on the question of Iraq is well known. From the very beginning, I thought that decision was a mistake. I don't have any grounds to change that opinion of mine. Quite the opposite. All the train of events of the recent years proves we were right. Well, if you looked at the world map, Iraq is a rather small territory, especially if you compare it with Russia or the United States. It seems easy to push down a small country, but just look at the splashes. We still don't know what to do with them. It is a small but very prideful nation, and there came up problems which were not seen before. People don't treat the occupation as struggle against the tyrannical rule of Saddam Hussein anymore. They now take it as a personal insult, and terrorists play upon that. Iraq didn't used to have terrorists. Now they do. It wasn't me who brought up this problem. It was you who asked the question, and I have to answer, because it's not my style to avoid straight questions. But I think we should talk less about what was done right or what was done wrong. I don't think it will help improve the situation now. We should think of more what we can do now in the nearest future. And generally, I agree with President Bush when he says that everything should be done to enable the Iraqi government to solve at least their security problems on their own. They need help building their own army, their own security service, police, so that it was possible to hand questions on this level over to the Iraqi people. What we are different at with George, he does not find possible to name any dates for foreign troops' withdrawal from the territory of Iraq. In my opinion, that would be a good thing to do. That would make the Iraqi leadership work more actively. Because if they know they will forever have American bayonets behind their backs, some might feel very comfortable under such an American umbrella. But if they know the deadline is defined when American and other troops withdraw, they will know they have to do something already today to be prepared for that date of foreign troops withdrawal. I think that would be right. But in the long run, this is the decision we have to take together at the level of the United Nations organization.
You undoubtedly followed the revelation by the National Intelligence Estimate in the U.S. that Iran did not have an active nuclear program. You had, months before, I believe, said the same thing yourself. What was your reaction to why the U.S. government revealed this now, and does this make any combat or war with Iran less likely, which is something I presume you would prefer?
This question needs to be put to the CIA director, as well as the leading persons of the American administration. Why did they do it at all? As well as they need to be asked why they destroyed the videotapes carrying terrorism suspect interrogations. These are not questions to me. These are questions to them. But if you ask me, and you ask whether it lessens the possibility for a military action, if this report of the Central Intelligence Agency is not aimed to distract attention of the Iranian side from real preparations for military actions, which theoretically is also possible, which would be extremely dangerous, I think it would be another very serious mistake. I mean, any military action against Iran, any. And if we take it that the report was published to reflect the objective picture of the ongoing events, then it only supports the reality that when the Russian side expresses its foreign policy stand on this or that question, is after all based on objective information. It brings nothing to me but joy. It also means that even among the American administration, there are people that think they have to tell the truth. This also brings joy to me. It also means that based on objective data, we can build a straightforward dialogue.